My guest today is Marc Emery, an internationally recognized cannabis activist, famously known as the Prince of Pot. We discuss his history as a political activist and proponent for cannabis culture, the current state of Western civilization, and the insidious ideologies that have captured it. Marc is a brilliant thinker with deep political and philosophical beliefs that form his perspective. Our conversation touches all corners of the modern condition and is a 1 hour ride through a colorful stream of consciousness. Stay tuned. Marc Emery, thanks for talking to me today, man. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
How nice of you to invite me, Jason.
Yeah, well, I told you before we started recording, but I grew up in Vancouver. I've only been in Alberta for about 2 years now. Your name is pretty much synonymous with BC Bud. For people who don't know, we have a lot of American listeners. Marc Emery has long been considered, quote unquote, the Prince of Pot. You've been a marijuana activist for years and years and years. And I do want to talk to you about cannabis today, but we will eventually
get right here, so I'll just
well, I'd imagine that you'll probably get pretty tired of talking about weed all the time, and there are so many other interesting aspects to who you are as a person, and
by the way, nobody asked me about weed anymore, so thank you for doing so. But no, it's not like people are clamoring to hear my opinion, because my opinion really doesn't mean anything in this environment. That's the thing, right? It can be nostalgic opinion. I can tell you fun stories. I can criticize the awful legal environment that we have in Canada, where everybody but the government loses money. But essentially, people aren't talking to me because I can't affect anything, right? And ultimately, when I was big, like when I was somebody from, like, say, 1990 to 2017, it's because I was taking a risk. I was taking a chance. I was trying to get something accomplished that no one else wanted to do. Well, that elevates you right to the top pretty good if what you're doing is honorable, right? So now I'm just enjoying life, raising children, and hanging out with Lara, my partner, spouse, and enjoying nature. And I by contrast, it's the most boring time in my life, but it's also in some ways the most satisfying and peaceful time in my life. Plus, it's the first time in 30, 40 years I don't fear going to jail. Like there's nothing happening in my life that should put me in jail under any circumstances, right? Well, from 1980 to 2017, I was trying to get arrested all my life, every day. Like I used to, before I would go, like on my summer of legalization tour, I went across Canada and smoked a bong or a big 1 ounce chonger in front of like 22 police stations, right? Because my point was, hey, a judge said pot's legal, so I dare you to arrest me so I can get to court to make pot legal. And of course, many police departments obliged me and did arrest me, did put me in jail. Some tried to keep me there and deny me bail. But suffice to say, you go around and do that when people say, well, that's crazy. Why do you want to go to jail? And I've been in 40 of them, 40 prisons and jails. And that's just separate ones. Some of those I've been in multiple times, but that's not added on to the 40, right? Like Vancouver's lockup on Main Street, I've probably been in there 6 or 7 times, but that just counts as one jail in my statistic. I've been in 40 different prisons and jail for a pot, right? So you do things like that and, take risks, take chances, and appear to do it for good reasons. I also made money by doing that. So it worked out for me that people want to spend money with someone that they believe in, who has credibility, who seems to be spending this money, because I gave $5 million out away for ballot initiatives and other really cool stuff around the world. I was having fun. I was making money. I was living life like I wanted to. So you'll never see me complain about being in any of those jails. That added up to about 6 years in total, and that's what I wanted. That's what I got. If you look for trouble, that's exactly what you will find. So you'll never see me complaining about my jail time. In fact, I usually paint it as a very rewarding time for me, where I was able to advance my thinking, read a ton of books, and think about the world and think about myself and think about what was important, and realize that you might have to pay a price for something honorable and noble. And I was glad to do that. But that's in the past now. So my mission is completely different. My mission is to raise our 3 girls and turn them into wonderful people. They're already wonderful people, but just make sure they can get out into the world intact when they decide they want to go out on their own. And for me, that's a beautiful mission too. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I have children of my own, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Now, um,
They do
it's
complain that the house smells of weed a lot, though.
well, the interesting thing about you is that you've always been synonymous with cannabis activism as you take your bong rip, right? Like that's kind of the image of Marc Emery most of us have come to
Well,
know.
that's
But
what, and I wanted that. That was my whole objective. Sure, I'm more than that, right? In fact,
yeah,
it was never a long-term plan to be in the weed industry or weed business or whatever it is, right? I'm not a weed seller, weed anything. I'm a terrible grower. I've tried so many times to grow pot, and I may have had, say, 2 successful years out of 10. Now,
right.
now a lot of things can happen. We've got animals of all kind. They're our biggest, deterrent. We don't really punish them for coming and eating our plants or stuff like that. But, I'm mostly just an observer of current events. And the reason I chose cannabis way back in 1990 is because I was a bookseller and the Canadian government had banned all books and magazines, video, everything about cannabis. Now, and all other drugs too, by the way. So in 1985, High Times magazine was banned from Canada. That ban lasted about 10 years, and we got it undone when we challenged these laws. But I had to like give out High Times in front of police stations, trying to get charged, and a book called Grow Your Own Stone. The publishers of the Canadian classic Grow Your Own Stone were raided in 1985, and the RCMP took 5,000 books away. So I thought, this is bizarre that I live in a country where they can round up books, ban books for not telling any lies, but for telling the truth. You could, if your pamphlet was an anti-drug, anti-weed pamphlet, that was okay. It was only illegal if it was in any way positive, like if the position taken was pro-cannabis, that was illegal. So I spend the next 4 years trying to get charged, and finally we do. When we give out pamphlets in front of a high school, after the police in York, Toronto, sent an undercover woman, looking like a teenage girl, and she went around and asked all the boys for weed. 52 high school boys found weed for, right? Now,
Yeah.
including a lot of guys who said they didn't smoke, we didn't know. But if some beautiful looking woman comes up to you and you're a high school nerd like me or most other guys, and they say, hey, can you help me find weed? You'd do anything to impress that girl. And that's what they did, right? So they ended up getting 52 kids charged in a sting operation. So we thought that was really bad. So we gave out pamphlets in front of the school telling people, here are your rights. This is wrong. This should be opposed. And the principal saw us giving those pamphlets out to students in front of the school, called the police, and the police arrested us. And that's what eventually, a year later, Judge J. Ellen MacDonald in the Ontario Superior Court said, no way is this legal to have laws that persecute people for giving out a pamphlet, like especially when it's just a pamphlet. So they struck that down. And then after that, High Times came back into Canada and Grow Books poured back in, and we published Cannabis Culture right away as well. So that started in 1990, and it was just like a process of trying to build a revolutionary infrastructure. Like, so the next thing was like, okay, we need seeds because the only way we're going to beat the government is outgrow them. If we grow more weed than they can destroy, we will make their efforts futile. As well as we also need an economy. We need to enrich our people financially as well as spiritually and information wise. So we need weed to sell. We need seeds to grow weed to sell, to cultivate, to make more weed. We need media. We need magazines. We need pot TV. We need electronic media. Then we need political representation. So then we created the BC Marijuana Party, the Canadian Marijuana Party, and did really well in the 2001 BC election. Ran a candidate in every riding, 79 ridings. We did 3.5% of the vote, which is pretty cool. And I remain the largest donor to a political campaign in the history of British Columbia. I donated $160,000 of seed money that year to those 79 candidates to get the campaign rolling. It was a great campaign, too. We got Richard Nixon's old campaign bus with his plaque on there from the DEA. Brian Wilson, the mayor of Grand Forks, since then, and he's probably been mayor 5 or 6 times now. He was the BC Marijuana Party leader for the 2001 election, and we had this Richard Nixon's bus driving across town. We called it the Cannabis, right? But it was a pretty, and that was, so there's so many joyous moments and events and things that happened in that period getting to where we are now. And if people want to know, well, why are you happy with legalization? And I said, well, I'm banned from it. I'm not even allowed to manage a weed store, or certainly not own one or be part of anything, grow up, you name I can. But was that in 2010, a little over 80,000 Canadians were arrested and charged for a cannabis offense, right? And last year there was like 600, 80,000 to 600. And of those 600, maybe 30 go to jail tops,
Right.
30, 40, right? Well, we used to have 10,000 a year go to jail for at least a night, and many of them for weeks and years, right? So the fundamental thing that I started was not so everybody could make money for better or worse, or what have you, was so people would stop getting arrested. So did we achieve that? Yes, we achieved that. Is that the one great thing that we can say Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party did? Yes, it is. That's still a great thing they did. Did it terribly, did it cynically, did it to reward their own friends, classic legal, legislating, liberal legislation, right? When their friends are rewarded. Fuck, every single legal weed company has a cop on its board of directors or a politician. Like there were
Right.
premiers Mike Harcourt, former Prime Minister John Turner, Bob Ray Premier. Got so many of these people, British Columbia and Glen Clark, are on boards of directors of weed companies. And what they did is they used these politicians and cops on their board of directors to go out and solicit more money. So it's free money for the politician just to sit in the board of directors and know nothing, do nothing, but lend his name and credibility of that name to their corporate entity, who then go out and raise more money on the stock market, invariably causing horrible things to happen. All the major cannabis firms in Canada have lost billions of dollars. And over 1 million Canadians invested in these companies, right? They were largely encouraged to by the government, who said, well, we want all this illegal business to come over to us. And that not only did not happen, but the government are the big beneficiaries at every level, being the
Mm.
wholesale monopolies in 9 out of 10 provinces, the retail monopoly in 4 out of 10 provinces. There's an excise tax of 10%. There's a producer tax. There's GST. There's, on it goes, right? Manitoba has a social responsibility tax on top of that. So the government's making money hand and fist. They hired about 5,000 new people since legalization in all the different bureaucracies at the provincial and federal level. They've added to the cost of weed tremendously. Um, so what we saved in law enforcement, we end up spending on bureaucrats to give out licenses to everybody. There's 2,000 legal producers in Canada. They all have to have legal licenses. They all need to have it done every year. They need to have all these inspections and protocol. This keeps an army of bureaucrats at Health Canada and the various provincial regulatory agencies busy, 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 right? So the size of government expanded, right? So what's supposed to happen when you legalize a form of vice is that you require less government because there are fewer laws to enforce, right? Whole criminal case. Look at all that court time you're saving. Look at all those lawyers you're not using. Look at all those crown attorneys you don't need to prosecute people, right? This would be the same argument for legalizing all drugs and then prostitution or whatever, right? We're just spending money punishing people for what exactly, right?
Hmm.
Um, but the idea being is that there's some savings to the taxpayer. Not only is justice enhanced, but now you're not paying for the corruption of the drug war, or you're not paying for the corruption of the illegal cannabis market. But instead, you're paying through the nose for a bureaucracy that never existed before, that is going to be hard to ever get rid of, right? So that's kind of like permanently built into the legalization now, and will permanently keep the expense of everything high. And to me, the best legalization in the world is Uruguay somewhat, but Thailand has a beautiful one right now. Now I hear a new government's come in and they're going to kind of retreat, which would be a shame. But Thailand has a beautiful example of how you should legalize cannabis. Basically, it just said anybody can open a little shop, anybody can grow weed, not too much. That's all. I just don't go crazy, but and just be cool, right? Basically,
Yeah.
and everybody pay the regular taxes. There were no special taxes on cannabis in Thailand. And so there's a really beautiful scene there. Again, it might be just me. Maybe, in fact, all legislation is done as terribly as the Cannabis Act was done, and maybe as corruptly and as self-serving. And probably that's true, right? So I'm disappointed because I had an idealized version of what legalization would look like, which was ridiculously naive. completely impractical, and taught me a lesson. If you go to government and ask them to do something, they might do it. So bear that in mind, right? So when I went to say, oh, legalize cannabis, I was saying, leave us alone. But
Yeah.
that's not what legalization means. Legalization means, well, you're going to regulate it now instead of us. Like we were the cannabis growers in the black market. We were the free market people. Now, yeah, there was probably some Hells Angels, some gangs, some criminal Vietnamese things going on. Probably there was that clear. Wherever there's opportunity, criminals will move in if it's illegal, right? If it's legal, they can't compete. There's just no way it's going to work, right? But that was a pretty big industry, and that was self-regulated quite well, right? Now, I mean, for me, I never dealt with anybody in all my life. I've been in the cannabis movement industry, smoking cannabis since 1980, 44 years. I've never yet encountered anybody who had a gun, like buying, selling, trading, doing
Hmm.
whatever. Whoever met with me, nobody was armed that I was aware of, right? So I would say that's pretty safe over time. Now, other people hang out with a different kind of people, maybe. But, so it's not like there was a lot to fear when it was illegal. Prices were quite reasonable. Like in 1980, when I first started smoking pot, not only was cannabis weed, actual, vegetative matter, really hard to find in Ontario, but it was $200 and it was seeded. Now the seeds could be taken out, you could get, but it was like, looked bad. Good pot was hard to find. The metal halide bulb wouldn't be developed until 1985, and that's when indoor growing started. Like winter of 1985 into 86, it explodes across North America, and because up till then everything was grown outside, everything. Right, fluorescent lights you could try indoors for seedlings and clones, but you're not going to get any yield on fluorescence. God, you'd need a lot of 40-watt fluorescence for that, right? But they do have a blue light, so you could do it. If you wanted to put 20 or 30 fluorescents together, you could get a pound out of it probably, but it's an awful lot of work. So it wasn't really an indoor thing until 1985, right? So, things really started taking off. But weed was about $200 an ounce in 1980. It is half that today, 44 years later.
Yeah.
So the overgrow of the government, it happened. We did overgrow the government. They legalized it. They gave up. Even now, the legal limit is you can grow 4 plants if you're in Canada. You can grow 4 in Alberta. But the fact is, if you grow 40 in your backyard, the police don't know if you've got some medical license. There's 8,000 Canadians now who can grow like 100 to 500 plants, right? They don't know where those people are. That's a lot. 8,000 people all with massive licenses for plantations. So if somebody sees you got plants in your backyard, cops never visit anymore. And the amount of plants it would take to fill my backyard would probably be a hundred. And if it was filled, it still wouldn't get anybody calling them because most people assume, well, you must be allowed, right? Everybody seems to be growing pot, no cops anymore, and they don't make any arrests and stuff like that.
Right.
So essentially, the legal limit has become at least a couple dozen for any ordinary person. No cop's going to worry about your 20 plants. He's assuming you've got some medical permit. He doesn't need to know, right? And so that scene has become very cool. Like at the producer end of things for the ordinary person, there's no interference by police. But once you decide to go commercial or come in out of the cold and stop being legal, then there's a problem, right? Like you want to be legal, then you have to comply with all these regulations, and that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and it's plainly not making money. But anyway, I don't know what to say about that because I'm benefiting as a consumer.
Hmm.
Smoking pot is cheap. But there's not as much good stuff around now as there were in the 90s and the aughts. Right up to about 2015, there was some incredible pot coming out, and I would say there's a lot less of that now because I was paying 3,000. I was paying $3,000 a pound for the absolute best out of British Columbia in 2016 for my shop in Toronto. And I was proud to pay more than anyone else. I wanted the absolute best that can be found in Canada in my shop. So, and now you can't find a lot of that great weed because a lot of those people retired. The people who are really good at it, they don't want to do that weed for $800 a pound. Like fuck that, right? I was
Yeah.
paying them 3,000, and you're going to pay 800 because that's what the market is. But you just can't find the truly mind altering revelatory strains like you could then. And of
Yeah.
course, there was so much great stuff. I mean, I had 400 or 500 different seeds back in the 90s and the aughts available. So many incredible stuff. You can't find them now. It's really a shame.
Oh
Everything's,
yeah.
all these hybrids have kind of homogenized everything, right?
Oh,
Any,
absolutely,
anyway,
absolutely.
you might want to ask me stuff without me rambling, so you better get it in.
No, I love it. I'm just absorbing it all, man. I what fascinates me about you, as I've read your writing, I've listened to you speak multiple times throughout the years, and the thing I think most people get confused when it comes to you is that people think you're an agitator, marijuana activist, but you have much deeper political
Well,
and philosophical ideas,
yeah, it
right?
all stems from Ayn Rand. I used to think I was a socialist, and I remember my first election campaign was 1968, going around pounding in NDP signs for my dad, who was a trade unionist in those days at 3M, a wonderful factory that did him good all his life. He worked there in London, Ontario. And but yeah, I remember the candidate too. It was in London East where we lived, and the guy's name was Alec Richmond. He was the NDP candidate in the federal election, which was won by the Liberal Charlie Turner in the first year of Trudeau mania, 1968. Everybody knew Trudeau was going to win that year, and so I grew up kind of being a socialist. Now I had my first business in 1971 when I'm 12, and it's very successful. I sell it when I'm 16 and open a bookshop in London, Ontario when I'm 17. So my instincts are very capitalist, right? But my sense of empathy is very socialist, right? Which sounds like a typical teenage kid, right? Capable, but wants to save the world for all the people who aren't that capable. But then in October 1979, after seeing these two libertarian candidates in the 1979 election for the libertarians, they said, "Listen, you should read this book." I went up to them. I said, for far right capitalists, you guys make a lot of sense. He goes, really? He said, if you think so, read this book. So it was called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand. And indeed, I did read it. And indeed, it did change my whole way of life. And without question, the most significant author to affect me for my whole life. And it's worked out for me. I think I've had a very productive, happy, well-adjusted, and comprehending life. Having read all her stuff, it prepared me perfectly for everything. Now, I had great mother and father too. They were lovely people. So between mom and dad and Ayn Rand's influence, and then I've always met good women who are like good to back me up. Because, to a lot of people, making a career of going to jail is just, that's a dodgy way to live, right? That's like, especially I've done 40 of them. I've been arrested and in prison and put in jail in every province, including Yukon. So and many for lengths of time. Heck, I got 3 months in Saskatoon Correctional for passing one joint, like, and that's 2004. That's not even that far ago, long ago, right? So crazy stuff's happening. Plus the 5 years in the U.S. that was done in 6 states, right? Now it's always fun to tell people you did time in Mississippi, right? Because everybody thinks of Cool Hand Luke, and I said, yeah, that parchment was just down the road,
Right,
right? Type
right.
of thing, right? So that's kind of I did all my time in the South, and but again, I have nothing bad to say about that experience.
Yeah,
So
that's fascinating, man. Because I've heard you talk about your jail experiences before, and you seem to be the sort of person who approaches just about every experience you have as a gift.
I do
And
because I had two wonderful parents, and everywhere I go,
right,
I'm reminded of so many people I meet everywhere, especially in prisons, who did not have two wonderful parents. In most cases, almost every guy you're going to meet in prison's father buggered off. You're not going to meet some guy in a prison saying, "Oh yeah, my dad, what a wonderful guy, always there for me, right? Yeah, I came to my grand." No, that's not what you hear. You usually hear them say, "Well, I didn't know my father. I didn't see him after age 4," or this
mhm,
kind of thing. That's the kind of people who are in prisons. People who had two wonderful, loving parents. Yeah, you might find like the Menendez brothers, some weird, aberrant murder. But no, you just don't find people who said, no, no, I had two loving, wonderful parents who were always there for me. But mysteriously, I decided at a party to put a needle in my arm, shoot myself full, and go rob a bank. No, you don't hear that. You just
right.
do not hear that, right? The problem is paternity in the modern era is not what it once was. There are races that are particularly bad at it as being fathers, but it's gotten worse at every level, whether it's Asian, white, Hispanic, or the black community. We've got more fatherlessness. We've got more couples not staying together for whatever reason. There's so many different reasons that might be that it's hard to summarize it as being, why there's a breakdown in parental, I guess, responsibility. People want money, people want freedom, people want opportunity. Like 100 years ago, men didn't ever meet women in the workplace. We didn't work with women at all. You were never allowed to be, a single person was never allowed to be with a married person in the same room, unescorted by someone, right? So this is how they maintained kind of a civilized order. You
Mm-hmm.
can't have people divorcing and fucking breaking, having these kids like unparented, and so in the past there were rituals and regulations that were understood that would keep us from having a breakdown. But a period I really liked, the late 60s and early 70s, that introduced the whole massive breakdown we're seeing now. Ultimately, everything I kind of liked in my life, I was wrong. I loved all those commies and Angela Davis and Revolution. No, that's led us to where we are today, where men think they can change with 13-year-old girls and call themselves women, right, while trying to join the teen swim team or the girls swim team. And I'm thinking, how did the fuck did that happen? It started in the 60s. By all those graduates went back to school and became communist professors in the 80s and 90s, turning out little automatons so that now every institution has brainwashed people who are taught a whole Marxist lexicon, and none of them can do anything. They're not like fixing plumbing or putting new light bulbs in or building houses.
Right.
Everybody who's part of the communist revolution are academics. And they're teaching our kids at every level, whether it's public school, high school, university. They're just endlessly brainwashing them. And people, remarkably, are paying for this experience hand over fist. These are expensive universities to go to. You could just pick up some cool books, e-books for that matter, and get the same education probably for less than $50. Right. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Please go ahead, Mark.
I
Please.
was going to say, I sound so much like the grandparents I never met. Right.
No. Yeah. I mean, it is really mind-boggling how that cultural revolution in the 1960s and 70s kind of morphed into this ugly capitalism, ultra capitalism of the 80s, the yuppie era. And then
That was a good period, though. that 82 to 89 period produced the best outside of 1966 to 69, which to me is the peak of the rock pop period, right? But all the six is great. The best period is 1983 to 86. You check out how many people had a first huge album in that period, and it's staggering how much incredible music we listen to today came out from 83 to 86. And after that, pop and rock declined rather noticeably until it became the ghetto of rap that we have today, where nothing is particularly memorable or historical, right? It's just so even our music scene, I think, is in peril. The 80s were a great period, probably the last of the great periods in a way.
Mhm.
After 9/11, security between Canada and the United States got so much. You know what? I went to the World Science Fiction Convention in Washington, D.C. in 1974 on a bus with a whole bunch of our friends, which we paid enough to charter a bus, go from London, Ontario to Washington, D.C. I'm 16 years old. There are no parents, nobody who's related to me on this bus. And I don't have any ID other than my social insurance number card. That's got my name because they gave it to you in grade 8 in case you get a job. You're going to need a social insurance. But otherwise, right, I didn't have any passport. And you know what? That whole bus, they let us all in. Yeah, you have a good time at that convention. That's how it used to be in the old days, right? Unless you were a notorious criminal that was immediately visible, right? You could come in, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I'm thinking, wow, it's so weird. I went to Washington, D.C. with all my friends on a bus when I'm 16 for 3 days, and there was no security state at all to concern oneself, right? Now, shortly after that, there would be a lot of hijackings and everything would start to change or what have you. But yeah, that was 50 years ago. I was going my first science fiction convention. I was just reminiscing. This is also my first business. I was a comic book dealer selling vintage Marvel comics starting
That's
on
right.
January 1st, 1971. I've still got all my original comic book catalogs, right?
Oh man.
Sold Amazing Fantasy 15 in 1971. It's in my catalog for $300. I actually had it over the lifetime of the 4 years I was in the comic book business, 71 to 75. I had Amazing Fantasy first Spider-Man appearance 8 times. The rarest comics I ever thought from Marvel were not what people think. Fantastic Four #1 was really scarce. 1 and 2 are really scarce, and but the most scarce one of all was Hulk #1 to 6.
Hmm.
right? Back in '63, those ones they didn't. They I don't know where they sold, but I never once found them. Like in 4 years of, and I sold every comic. I had Fantastic Four number one probably 3 or 4 times, Spider-Man number 2 or 3, but Amazing Fantasy 15, I remember eight. And all the others, Daredevil, I had them all. But Hulk, no, Hulk number 1 to 6 were the rarest, right? Anyway, it's funny stuff. Anyway, that's 50 years ago. I got out of that business and into City Lights Bookshop, which is a place in London, where I discovered the book selling was so wonderful before the internet and before Amazon.
Right.
It was a place I could hold court. It was a rare antiquarian bookshop.
Yeah.
And now it was true even in 1975 that 5% of the people read 95% of the books. That's probably still true, except it's just come down as a quantitative number. Like, in other words, at least in 1975, maybe 20 million people were reading all the books, right? But
Yeah.
now I'm not very convinced that there's more than 1 million people reading 2 books a year in North
Yeah.
America, right? I mean, we read online, but a whole book, that's hard for people's attention span anymore to just physically limit themselves to only one thing to
Yeah.
think about a book, right? A story that has whereas we're used to going from information, we're tabloids, we're bombarding ourselves with little bits of information frequently, right? And well, you can see everywhere you go, from subways to buses to parks, people are looking at their phone, right? Again, this constant feedback stimulation going on, right? A book is a way more old-fashioned thrill, right? Like, I've recently been reading it in the bathtub, right? Not caring if I get them all watermarked or curved and shit, which is what happens, right? But just it feels so sensual to be reading and not be distracted by any other bits of information, right? In
Yeah.
this hot water, right? And I'm thinking, this is the world we have lost, right? Because
Yes.
you look at what's happening, all the pleasure is technologically oriented that people are getting, right? Whatever it is they're doing, their little smartphone is the intermediary between that, whether it's dating, whether it's ordering food, whether it's finding out who has what, where you're getting your news. Fuck, everything is through this phone. Like, I am talking to you through this phone too, of course, so we're even having that conversation. But at least that makes sense. That's not like you're not dodging reality by using
That's
this
right.
technology to talk, right? We're saving money. I'm not in your studio. I don't have the money for that. You don't have we can have a conversation on an economical level through this technology. But going to a park and then looking at it, why did you come to the park? Like,
Yes.
that's where you're addicted. You're using this like a drug type of thing.
Yeah.
And we all have that's available to everybody, that possibility with this technology, because this technology is way more all encompassing than anything we've ever had before, right? And nature is asking a lot of us to adapt to everything that's happening, right? You look 125 years ago, there were no cars, there was no plane, there was no radio, there were no motion pictures. Just 125 years ago, no motion pictures, no computers.
Yeah.
Like and in 125 years, after like evolving for possibly 500,000 to 1 million years, like an upright hominid, like that we are. Brett Weinstein will tell you all about this, but like we've been evolving over 1 million years. Things don't fucking happen that fast, right? We went backwards in some ways too, from the Roman period to the Middle Ages, right? The 1300 period. That's a regression over 1300 years. And in the space of 125 years, we're expected to evolve fast enough to understand, motorized flight, motorized travel, languages of every kind, news from all over the world bombarding us. Back 100 years ago, just before the radio, like, news took weeks to travel. Like,
Yeah.
what was going on in the Parliament of England would have to wait for a boat to bring a physical piece of paper over so people could say, this is what happened in England last week, right?
Hmm.
And in the space of 120 years, we can now have a Starlink put in our brain, apparently, where we can just
Yeah.
get the news 24/7 in our brain, don't need to do anything,
That's
right?
right.
We're automatically, our brain is online, right?
Hmm.
You can't adapt to that in the space of 4 or 5 generations. That's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Talking about books, I'm a voracious reader. I can't stop reading. That's kind of my problem. And the thing that I like, for me, I'm reading Rise and Fall of the Third Reich for the third
by the
time.
way, great thing. But you know what? And let you get back to that. That book reminded me of something, though. It's 1,000 pages, and I always notice that when they're writing a book, and I love that book. I've read it twice, right? But they rush the last part. Like,
Yeah.
he spends 1,000 pages doing like 1920 to like 1942, and then the last 3 years of the war, it's like in 50 pages, right?
That's right.
Because
Yeah.
because it's like he's saying, you know how that part turned out, so I don't need to tell you what happens, right?
Yeah.
Then they get incinerated, he kills himself, the Russians take over, right?
Yeah.
But it's a great book, and that was a classic like 50 years ago. Actually, it just
Oh,
came out 50 years ago.
yeah, well, I keep reading it because my brain can only hold so much information. So I find myself in this cycle of reading the same 100 books over and over because I forget them, 5, 10 years down the line once I've read a bunch of other books. But, it's interesting that you bring that up because I was reading last night again about when Hitler invaded Austria, right? And how,
The Anschluss.
yeah, and how Britain and France just kind of stood back and did nothing. And it
But
took,
but you can justify that. After all,
okay,
Austria is all German speaking, right?
that's right.
It's like when we talk about Ukraine, Russia. To me, I'm not worried about Russia taking over Crimea and four of those eastern states because they're mostly Russian speaking people anyway.
That's
So
right.
who cares if they're the mafia is the Ukraine or the mafia is Russia? They're both corrupt regimes, but they use the same language, same people, same race essentially. Although Russia has a lot of races, but basically they're the same as Russian people. They're simply arguing over which dictator are we going to have. That's not a reason to kill anybody, and it's not a reason for us to support that war. Either way, right? We shouldn't be giving any of our money to any country for any war, right? But that one doesn't make any sense at all. What's going on there? We're not really getting the whole story because Ukraine and Russia are very similar ethnically, language wise. They have the same religion. Like I'm thinking, man, why are they fighting exactly? Well, how can you get mad at who are essentially their brothers, right? These are people related. There are millions of Ukrainians who have family in Russia and vice versa. None of this war makes any sense. And it bothers me that we're involved with it. I think Canada is making a terrible mistake supporting an adversary to someone who has nuclear weapons. Like we should probably like not be getting involved with that since we don't have nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
right? So I'm thinking there's punching above your body weight and there's just being a fool, right? Like I wouldn't be offending people that have nuclear weapons on the other side. Like we can depend on the United States to protect us all we want, but I wouldn't go looking for trouble, and I think that's a big mistake. So the thing is that yeah, people shouldn't be invaded. But I wouldn't have done anything in 1938. Now, it was different when they finally attacked Poland, or actually even Czechoslovakia in
That's
March
right.
1939, right? The Czechs aren't Germans. They don't
Mhm.
speak German, and they caved in too, right? And you can see that, right? It takes a lot of nerve to stand up to people who say, we're going to basically annihilate anybody who doesn't go along with the program, right? We see a lot of silence in Canada when we see terrible things happening, but you can lose your job. Like that's why I work at a grocery store on the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., because they are so desperate to have good people work for them in this horrible time at low wages that they don't care about my politics. But everybody else does. I
Mhm.
can't work in any retail store here because I offend everybody. I offend the trans community, the alphabet cult, the people who loved COVID, the people who loved the liberal government, and so on. It goes on. All my positions typically are minority positions a lot of the time, and people will protest if they see you and they feel offended. They'll picket or, they'll complain to my boss. Hey, I don't. You shouldn't hire him because he's a transphobe or a homophobe or whatever phobe or a Russophobe. Take your pick. He's pro-Israel. He's anti whatever, right? Like
Right.
there, someone like me just couldn't work in a public venue because the public would demand that some aspect of it would demand that I be punished or canceled or what have you. And it certainly happened before, right? So that's the thing. For people to speak out on issues where you might get negative feedback to the degree that you can be walked out the door, people are aware of that. They've seen like teachers fired immediately for saying, no, there aren't 1,500 dead people in these graves, right? My friend Amy Eileen Ham's a nurse. She said men can't be women. Bang. She's had a world of hurt for 3 years in a
That's
witch
right.
trial. She says men can't be women. It's like so basic, really. So that's Orwellian, right? It's one thing. Like I would defend someone's right to tell lies, or someone's right to tell bullshit fiction, or someone's right to even be hateful. I hate you. You should die, all of you. Yeah, you can say it. To me, whatever we say reflects on us more than to whom we are addressing. You
Right.
know, that's on. If I say some stupid shit, that's on me, right? It's not on the person I'm saying it to, right? But anyway, so this is the situation: is that people are afraid to acknowledge just the truth, and if you can scare people in a democratic society into not acknowledging basic fundamental truth, like gravity exists. It's not just a good idea. It's immutable, right? Same
Right.
with you. There are men and women and there's nothing else. That's all there is, right?
So I wanted to ask you because your history and your knowledge, or sorry, your knowledge of history, is pretty extensive, and
Yeah.
I
Read 140 books in prison. That was one of the things I was very grateful to do.
yeah, and I you were what you were just talking about in terms of ideological suppression, um, and just in
No, there
terms of
isn't ideological suppression. There's probably even too much ideology, really. What there is just expression suppression. People just don't want to talk about it because there's
right.
consequences. Now, they should talk about a lot of these things. We should talk about the fact that food is terrible, inflation, but people need to know, well, why does that happen, right? It happens because government produced billions and billions in cash and gave it out for us to all stay home and do fuck all. Right now, I
Right.
didn't get in on that action, so I don't. It wasn't me. But when the government prints up a big pile of money, gives it out to everybody, and says stay home and don't do anything, there's going to be a price to pay because everybody's going to go buy stuff with that money
Hmm.
when it's not being made. Like no one's making it, right? So there will be shortages and shortages that will last years and shortages that will send prices soaring. And then everybody's trying to chase up to it, right? Like even in my job, started out a year and a half ago at $17 and now I'm getting 19, right? Because the upward pressure on wages, right? And
Hmm.
where I work, they have an army of people. So if we're all getting these increases, man, it's having a very negative inflationary period. But people don't understand why. They just think somebody's greedy. People are always greedy. Everybody's greedy in the right circumstances, right? The capitalist system moderates that through competition, and
Hmm.
successful supply chains keep prices reasonable, right? Everybody, if they could, would double the price of everything they sell if they could get people to pay for it, right? Everybody's greedy. We all should count on that greed as a motivating factor, but greed doesn't make prices go up. A controlled system with government money makes prices go up, right? Where there's monopoly, where there's controlled regulations, and too much concentration of power, like we have in this country, like we have in every country in a way. I mean, I was astonished when I saw that movie called Who Owns the World, right? There's a monopoly, and the amount that State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard, those pension funds who have trillions of dollars in pension, they basically have a controlling interest or portion of every major corporation on earth. It is staggering how much media, how much manufacturing, how much energy is influenced by State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock pension funds, right? And most Canadian teachers, all their pension funds are done through BlackRock and Vanguard, right? So it's not some unknown other out there that's who's controlling all this money. It's our money. It's every pensioner's money. And as far as they're concerned, yay, BlackRock, go do whatever you have to fucking do so I can live till I'm 90 on these pension funds, right? That's the dream, right? We retire Freedom 55, as Ricky would say on the Trailer Park Boys, right? Oh, his was Freedom 35. Actually, it's London Life that's Freedom 50. And that's the dream. We retire at 55 if we can do it. And then we live long life till 90. And some mysterious guy controlling our pension funds is out there making money for me. I don't need to know,
Right.
right? I don't need to know that I'm part of the problem. that these entities that I have given my authority to are in fact dominating and controlling everything in the world. And do I pay attention to their ideologies and what they're asking? No, I do not. I just want that money, that pension fund money, right? So that's the world we live in. Like, and we have a lot of retired people now, like tons of retired people, way more than ever before, and they all have their money and their assets put with these people who control all these entities, right? I don't know how we got to this. You're gonna have to reel me in every now and then
Oh no,
if
no.
we get like a stray
Like I
here.
said, I'm just absorbing it. I mean, this is all
You're a
really.
good you're a good person to interview because one thing I like about Joe Rogan when he talks to people, he lets them speak. He lets them go on and on, say what you want, and then he comes in at an appropriate time and just kind of adds a little element or asks a question, and then the person carries on again. Like Jordan Peterson. Joe Rogan gets the best. I've seen so many Jordan Peterson interviews, but now what I'm learning is how the art of the interview, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just it's let the guests talk. People aren't listening for me. They
They
can, you know what
might,
I mean?
they
They
might.
they might.
I tell you one thing. Jordan Peterson's best show is a woman who starts from the very beginning, says, "I don't like you. I don't agree with anything you stand for. I'm opposed to what you stand for," and it so shocks him. Like he's like taken aback. He's actually kind of crusty and a little off kilter for about 5 minutes, but then he gets rolling. And
Right.
I used to love that. I used to hate loving. When I was on a radio show and it was a call-in show, I would tell them, I said, listen, don't have anybody on who likes me. Really, I said, that's really boring radio. They're just going to say, Mark, I love your work, blah, 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 and I'm going to have to say something. And it's bullshit. I said, that's not what they want to hear on the other end. They want to hear the conflict. It's like reality
Right.
shows. Tell me who your enemies are. And if you don't have any enemies, you can't be on a reality show. Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
the perfect cast member of a reality show is a woman who says, see, she's trying to destroy me. Excellent. Let's get
Right.
that person on and put them right opposite you.
Right.
So it's the same thing with me. I said, listen, just put the haters on. The haters are who people really tune in to listen to, right? Let them, and also I'm going to have my best answers for these haters, right? Those are the
Yeah.
people I need to convince. I don't need to convince the people who love me. So the people who love me, don't put them on this show. And they go, why? You're kidding? I said, no. You know as well as I do. Let's don't put anybody on who likes me. Let's put on only the haters, and we'll have an awesome show, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
it's true.
yeah. Well, I'm an essayist. Like that's what I do. The podcast kind of came out of that, and I have tried and tried to have people on that I disagree with, just to have a basic conversation. I'm not trying to change their mind. I'm just trying to explore ideas that may be different from my own, right?
I would go on
And
any show whatsoever if they had an audience. It doesn't matter what their ideology is. I don't care. If you're going to put me
right,
on Unfiltered Live, I'll do your commie hour. Heck, I'll go on a Nazi white supremacist, whatever, right? Or whoever, right? If the Southern Poverty Law Center wants to have me on, or the antihate.ca, or any of this, fine, bring it on. That'd be awesome, right?
yeah, well, that's the difficult part, right? Is people don't want to engage in discourse
They
nowadays
don't,
because they
and that's
because
why it
they
doesn't happen.
well, that's it, and it's again because under ideological or ideology underpins most of it, right? So they can't have their faith challenged
Well, and
because
we're also entering a period now where feelings trump facts. So, in other words, even if you're right, it doesn't matter because the truth hurts me,
right,
right? The truth makes me unsafe here. So like the trans issue is the perfect thing. You can stand right beside a big gormless dude who's dressed like a woman, and go, "You're a guy," and he's going to say, "Oh, you're making me feel unsafe. I feel threatened." By what? Biological reality? So the actual fact is being used against you, right? Whereas what you have to pander to are people's feelings, right?
that's right.
And well, that's really new. That's unprecedented in human history, where we can, like religion does that. Religion, let's overlook the facts of existence and let's think that there's one God creating it all and responsible for every single thing that happens, like it's God's will and all that sort of stuff, right? Well, we know that's not true, but nobody else is supposed to get punished for telling them that or believing that or anything, right? Like, in other words, there's no blasphemy laws here, right? Which is what that would be. Oh, you called our God, something, and so you must be punished, right? And that's what the gender nonsense is all about, right? It's a religious cult, and if we don't go along with it, we're blasphemers, and we have to be punished in a public way. It's not even like a
Hmm.
private way. Like there's, the old days, the Star Chamber was they'd drag you off the street and then convict you privately. No one knew. That's bad enough, right? But here it's like public humiliation, which is what the Chinese ESG scores are all about, right? All their social participation scores. So if you're a good person, you can't get on the subway that day because your score is too low because you spoke out against the great leader. And in fact, the people you're hanging out with now, you can't go at night. You can't buy these products, right? They're controlling what you can and cannot do based on your behavior,
Hmm.
your political behavior, your public behavior, this kind of behavior type of thing.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I often look at it the same way. It is a cult. right? That this extreme leftism, and it always has been, right? Like you and I both know history quite well. You can go back in time to the very beginnings of Leninism and
Yeah.
Maoism, and you can see how they all have dogmatic tendencies to them, right?
Well, and it's not just the left too. Like there's cults on the right. I just happen to agree with them a lot more. But Donald Trump is leading a cult for sure,
For sure.
right? And now, if it were up to me, I'd probably vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.,
Me too.
right? Even though I agree with Trump more than I agree with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but
Hmm.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has integrity and humanity and is a thinking person. So I trust his judgment more than I trust Trump's judgment, even though Trump's ideology is very similar to mine. Right now, my candidate would be Ron DeSantis. I don't think there's anybody who's nearly as qualified as him for all the things that I think should be done. Right, but it's not up to me, and it's up to a bunch of American voters, and they seem to love Trump. And I'm just thinking, man, that's some wild stuff there between Biden and Trump, two of the worst possible candidates you could put forward. Just considering, like Kamala Harris, that's what keeps Biden's doctors hopeful, right? She cannot become president. That would be a disaster, right?
Right.
I don't know who Trump's going to pick for his VP, but I'm going to be very interested in that, right? Because I figured either one of them could very easily die in the next couple of years, right?
Oh,
So,
of course.
yeah, you
Yeah.
better be careful who you vote for in this election. That's why I'm curious to see who Kennedy picks for his VP as well. Because I think he'll be in the running in a lot of states. I think he's quite capable of getting 20-30%. And
Yeah.
once you're in that area, you're in firing range. If something really good happens to you on the campaign, or something bad happens to Biden or Trump, or some chaos that contributes to instability, RFK might look very attractive at that point. So I'm hoping so. Half the world is going to the polls in the next 12 months, and Canada goes to the polls in another 17 months, 18. We can't wait for it. Although Poilievre's lead keeps getting bigger and bigger, which I'm pleased about because he spoke out against gender ideology. And, the liberals try to make it, oh, you're going to pay for that. No, they had their record popularity. The conservatives have never been more popular in the country in like 100 years as they are right now, which really translates as that people hate Trudeau so much now, right? And it's funny, they always stay a little too long. 10 years is the top end for any Canadian prime minister. You never get more than 10, right?
Yeah.
Trudeau was pushing it when he had 13, but people
Mhm.
hated him at the end like a lot, right? And he snuck back in when Joe Clark screwed up. So, and Trudeau, and they never seem to want to acknowledge that you're just hated. Like, come on, you got to
Yeah.
go now, right? And Mulroney, like everybody treated Mulroney like an elder statesman, eulogized Ronald Reagan, and yet he was hated at the end of his thing too. When the next election was held, the Conservatives dropped from like 180 seats to two, right? So Canadian voters, taxpayers, citizens have no tolerance for anybody who sticks around about after 8 years. 8 years
So
is about all they really want to give you.
So do you okay, so first of all, the thing I do want to add to the Trump thing, because I saw this happening, and there is a personality cult that emerged in response to the woke neo-Marxism on the left, right? Like
Right.
there's a new ideological cult that's emerged on the right, and Trump is kind of leading that, and I completely agree with you. I agree more with Trump than I do with Robert Kennedy, but I think Robert Kennedy is the right choice. I think he's the
Yeah.
right guy for the US. And with Trump's recent comments that he made regarding the COVID-19 vaccines, and kind of basically
Yeah.
puffing his chest saying I was the guy who did it.
Yeah.
I can see some of the people who were on the fence about him fracturing off and voting for Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, I can too, because Trump was pro-vaccine. He was pro-lockdown. He didn't really change until it was too late to really change, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I like Trump. One of the most remarkable things about Trump in all the years is that all the people who caricature him, like James Austin Freeman on Saturday Night Live, who does a brilliant job now, Alec Baldwin, their impressions all made me like Trump more.
Yeah.
And Alec Baldwin said that's what bothered him. It doesn't work if it's not funny, so it has to be funny. But the
Right.
problem with a caricature that's funny is you bring likability to them. I saw this recently on Saturday Night Live where I saw Mitch McConnell be portrayed in a sensitive and sympathetic way. Right? It was about four people from the Republican Party all talking about how Trump abused them. But yeah, 100% for Trump, right? Which is so true. Trump will call you and insult you, and then you say, "Oh, I support Trump now for president, and then it's like all those insults didn't happen, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
how humans conduct themselves. If you insult me a lot, I'm never gonna forget that, right? If you
Right.
call me, Ron Sanctimonious 500 times in order to crush me politically with lies and bullshit, and I
Right.
turn around and be loyal to you, oh man, that's hard to do. That's hard
So
to do.
so with Justin Trudeau, because I mean our country is in a very shaky place right now, and
Well, what do you
you
mean by that? Let's look at that word shaky, because there's two ways to look at it. Either the country is very resilient, and once the conservatives are elected next year, we'll recover, we'll have some balance, things won't be so crazy. Or do you mean we've got a permanent change in the way this country is?
I feel so. This was what I was actually going to, because you brought up a good point, right? Like most of our prime ministers in Canada, if they stick around too long,
Well,
they're vehemently hated
yeah,
by the majority
all
of the
all of
country.
them, no
S-
exceptions.
So so if what we're seeing with Justin Trudeau, is this just a continuation of the same cycle, or do you think he is fundamentally changing our country for the worse?
Oh, I think he's fundamentally changed the country for the worse. And a couple of, they all relate to his dictatorial tendencies. All people in power want to seize more power because it make their job easier. Suppress dissent, get through all the obstacles just so that we can do what I think we ought to do. And then, they leave office, right? And whatever it is they stood for lives on to torture the rest of us, right? Um, but Trudeau, he's bringing in like controlling the internet, controlling social media stuff. It's never great when they bring in stuff like that. It means more bureaucrats, more oversight, more intimidation, more criminal prosecution. But more importantly, for example, I think we should stop all migration from Russia, from Muslim countries. No more Muslims, right? I wish the ones that are here already well. I hope they come in peace, but we don't need an increase in Islamicists in our society. They're dangerous. They're antithetical to all Western values. They can't get along with anybody once they get a certain population base, 25%, they agitate for problems. And Muslim people don't get along with anybody anywhere in the world, whether it's Hindus, Chinese, Uyghurs, Westerners, Europeans, you name it, Christians in Africa. They just don't. We should keep them very separate. But they're going to make a law that says that's hate speech for me to say we shouldn't allow migration from Islamic places where women are raped, where women are treated as chattel, where women are executed for not wearing a hijab, where they can be married off at age 9 because that's when the Prophet Muhammad said it was okay, et cetera, et cetera. The treatment of gay people, of abortion, of women, of children in Islamic countries is reprehensible, and we should not welcome that here. We shouldn't welcome that influence here. And so, but that's going to be illegal to say that. You're not going to be able to say that in Twitter and X. And so what's going to happen is the government's going to punish the carriers, not me. They're going to come and send me a postcard and saying, what you're doing is hate speech, because I think, oh, awesome. I get to go to court. I get to have a show trial. I get to do what I've always done, right? No, no, no. They're just going to go to X and say, listen, your company is violating. We're just going to stop you from transmitting stuff in Canada. So then they'll do all the dirty work for them. They'll send me the postcard that says, you lost your account because, you're saying anti-Islamic stuff or anti-trans stuff or fill in the fucking blank, whatever. Like I'm
Mhm.
anti a lot of stuff. I don't wish anybody any harm, but I definitely don't want those influences to predominate in our culture, in our society, right? That's going to be thought of as hate unless you're down with the program. So we've got to stop that new bill. I think it's Bill 63 that wants to regulate everybody's social media. We need to get rid of the Liberal governments, and we need to strip Justin Trudeau of his Canadian citizenship. I think that I think it's merited. I don't think he should be allowed to stay in this country once we get rid of him. He's lucky that we're going to get rid of him peacefully through the democratic process and the ballot box because he's damaged his country. Like, I mean, that's really weird that for 8 months in a democracy in 2021 and 2022, I could not go on a plane. I couldn't get on a train. I couldn't go into most businesses. I couldn't
Yeah.
go to the arena that I paid for with my taxes. I couldn't go to the library. I couldn't go to the aquatic center. My kids, our middle girl, because she wouldn't wear a mask and we didn't get anybody vaccinated, they built a special plastic cubicle for her in the corner, segregated her from all the other students, and put a plastic screen around like that. I'm talking, these are insane people, right? Over something that didn't affect kids at all. We all got COVID here. None of us got back. And it was just like a flu that lasted 36 to 48 hours, right? All the
Yep.
kids turned kind of white, didn't feel great. I mean, everybody had this exact same thing. I'm the only person that didn't really get any noticeably illness, right? But it was nothing. It was nothing. And of course, when we notice now that there was no flu that year, when there's normally like 150,000 to a million cases, and now the flu is back, and we have these numbers, but there's no COVID anymore. And then now they just said, well, COVID is the flu, so it's all the same, really. And
Yeah.
so, which is what it was. So we had the whole world shut down, and a police state was instituted. Skate parks were closed. Have you ever seen that footage of the guy being arrested for skating on the ice rink by cops in
I
Canada
did. I
because
did.
people were forbidden from skating on an ice? Oh man, there was a lot of madness in that too. That is yet to be explored properly. We need a proper book and a proper documentary outlining how terrible the state got, and the media went along with them, right, and encouraged and agitated for them. This is why they're all collapsing. People aren't buying that product from CBC and CTV. And in fact, you look at the alternate media, they're hiring people. Rebel News, they were hiring 7 or 8 people. I applied for one of those jobs, right?
Hmm.
Because I've run a newsroom and I've done stuff. Now, oddly enough, they didn't hire me. They didn't even get back to me. Maybe on their website it wasn't working or something like that. But I thought, no, that's something I could do, right? Run a newspaper or newsroom or what have you. But anyway, they're hiring. True North is hiring. So a lot of our people, on the right, on the libertarian front, who have developed media are actually thriving.
Yep.
And because they started small. Remember, the problem with legacy media is when they all retired, they get pensions and shit, right? That's a big burden. That's why car companies couldn't thrive in North America. Because everybody like my dad, who worked in a company for 30 years, if they live another 30 years and retire, the company has to pay these pensions, right? Whereas upstart competitors don't have any of that. Like any car company that started in the last 20 or 30 years doesn't have anybody getting
Hmm.
pensions, right? Now they will soon, but and whereas Ford and GM and all those other legacy car companies, they've had workers for decades drawing money out that their competitors don't have to pay because they're newer, right? So it's difficult to go forward in an emerging world with the same kind of like wonderful standard of living we had in the 50s and 60s, right? That
Yeah.
was a
Do you think that standard of living is over? Do you think that
No,
we've
we live better than ever before. Like that's the problem. What we have is a great standard of living that we're not earning. And so it's on debt. It's on time, right? Like the country owes a shitload of money. A lot of Canadians are in debt personally. The mortgages they're paying for now have a substantial interest rate. So a lot is going to food. A lot is going to their mortgage or their rent. Rent is going up really quick. There's no extra money to save, right? And so that is ominous because that's affecting everybody. It's one thing to say, okay, a lot of people got laid off in media, like 2 or 3 or 4 thousand people got laid off. Okay, that's bad for those people. So that just affects them and maybe some spillover, right? But it'll be made up in other areas where jobs are being created and people, and that's is what's going to happen. But when everybody feels the hurt, like we felt with food inflation, I work at a grocery store. I've seen how prices go up. And by the way, I don't blame my employer. My employer, the company makes the same percentage, 3 to 4% on every dollar. That's not a
Mhm.
lot. They employ an army of people, like 100 and some odd thousand people in Canada. Like an army of people, and all they make is 3, 4 cents on every dollar spent. That's not a lot of money to me. Like as an employee, I think that they have a great health plan. I've got 3 kids. They pay for the orthodontics, the dental work, cleaning, drugs, whatever needed from my wife, right? So they're looking after 5 people through my health plan, just me working there, right? So that's a great thing, right? And I got injured briefly, right? Well, they cooperated with WorkSafe and I got 90% of my wage for 4 weeks while I was injured type of thing, right? So, like that's a good employer, and here's federal parliament thinking we need a special bureau or a tax on you to control your inflationary spending, and I'm thinking no, 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 that's going to make it worse. Whatever taxes any company pays has to be passed on to the consumer. So there's no way to get around it. Inflation is caused purely by the people issuing the paper currency, right? It must be because I got Bitcoin. Somebody gave me $188 in Bitcoin exactly 18 months ago. It's worth $700 today. I looked at
Yeah.
it, it just keeps going up and up. I'm going, wow, this is wild. And the only reason I have it is because it's kind of too difficult to sell. Like I kind of just wanted to sell it. I said, I wrote my friend, I said, anybody I can sell my Bitcoin to? Like, how do you do that? It's sitting in my wallet. Can I just sell it? Can I give someone a 5% off and they buy it or some shit? Like what happens, right? But I never got around to it and it keeps going up. So now it's worth $700. So now I'm kind of almost thinking, okay, I'm gambling with the house, house's money here, right?
Right.
Because I just got my 188. So people keep saying, hang on to it. And week after week, it does seem to be going up. I have no idea really why. But also, what this tells you is that Bitcoin isn't really going up, just like gold's not really going up. Gold was
Mhm.
$35 an ounce in 1970, and now it's 2000 something. Gold didn't go up. It's the value of paper currency went down,
Yeah.
right? Because $2,000 worth of gold today probably buys what $35 worth of gold made in 1970. People think inflation is only like 10 times. No, no, no. In 1969, a comic book was 12 cents. The same comic book today probably would be $5. That's like 35 times more.
Yeah.
Chocolate bars, a Milky Way in 1969 was 10 cents, and it was bigger than it is now, too, right? Now it's $1.79. That's 18 times inflation, right? So
Yeah.
these are substantial increases, right? A home in 1974, I bought my first home in 1976, but a home was like $24,000. Now that same home is $750,000. It's up by 30 times, right? So and yet it's a used house. It's like now it's 50 years old now, but it keeps going up. Why does a used house go up in value, right? It didn't. It's the value of paper money has gone down, right?
Right.
Like minimum wage in 1969 was probably $1.25. Now it's like 17, $18. But that shows you that that hasn't kept up. That's only 15 times more, right?
Right.
But a lot of stuff has gone up by 35 times. Now, it's all balanced by the fact that a lot of stuff has come down. When we called my family, where my parents are from England, I'm born in Canada, but when we called family in 1965 for Christmas and only could afford on Christmas Day, it was $3 a minute. Now it's two
Wow.
cents. Now it's 2 cents a minute, right? When my
Right.
parents flew back for a rare trip to England once every 8, 9, 10 years, right? It was $1,000 return on BOAC. That would be like paying $20,000 today, and yet you
Right.
can go to England from Vancouver, let alone Toronto, for under $1,000, right? And
Right.
that's still fuel, right? Fuel's gone up a lot. But what's gone up is they've managed to do economy of scale brilliantly in the aviation industry, right? Where they can still cart people like on with real fuel that's like 25 times more. When I traveled across Canada in 1967, right? And what is that, nearly 60 years ago? Gas was 37 cents a gallon, right? So
Right.
that's probably like 8 cents a liter. Well, now it's $1.65 to $2 a liter, right? Like that's gone up unbelievably, maybe like 25 to 30 times, right? Now taxes are part of that increase too, and that affects it. But you can see real inflation has been like dramatic, right? And yet in the last 2 or 3 years, it's been like 30, 40% increase
Right.
of cost of food. That's some scary stuff happening there, right? Because yeah. Anyway, these are the crises that we're looking at. Stuff that's built in that's not going to be easy to solve. Right? It'll be easy to solve, and they will solve. They just say, "Okay, guys, you can't compete in women's leagues anymore. That's the end of that shit. It's over." And is anybody going to cry about it? No, no one's going to
Yeah.
cry. Nobody with any daughters is. Yeah, let's put men into my daughter's change room. Right? Like what the fuck?
Well,
Right?
yeah, I mean that's the part of all this, right? Is that it's almost like we're talking about subjective reality versus objective truth, right? And eventually objective truth is going to win because it's objective and everybody can see it. Your subjective whims of, I want to, like you said, I want to change in a girl's change room, or I want you to call me this, or
Yeah.
let's pretend something is what it
Or
isn't.
these guys think they're lesbians. Suddenly they become trans lesbians. Like, fuck off, you
Yeah.
fucking indulgent narcissist twip. Like, I have nothing but contempt for these perverts who are trying
Yeah.
to get into spaces they don't belong with the most outlandish stories, and that there's
Right.
people that are willing to back them up. Like it kills
Right.
me, right? Like
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? Let's end on that. Indulgent narcissist twerp might be
yeah,
the best fucking phrase I have heard in a long time.
Hey, I don't know if any of this is actually any good, but I had fun. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh no, this was fantastic.
Okay.
The less I talk, the better, man. Like I'm here to talk to Marc Emery, not here to
Oh, okay.
share all my
And,
stupid
and you know
ideas.
what? We didn't even get started, really. You just let me ramble, which
Yeah,
was a lot of fun. But if you want to do it again with specific questions, that'll be fun too.
dude, Mark, I will have you back. I'll reach out offline and we'll arrange another one because I didn't even ask you. Like, I wanted to talk to you about running for the PPC again. I wanted
Oh,
to
yeah,
talk to
we'd
you.
love to. I doubt
Uh,
they're going to let me. I actually want to run for the Conservative Party of British Columbia. The riding is the Sunshine Coast, which I'm right in the middle of, and I love this riding, and it would be perfect in my old beat up 2001 Subaru driving up and down the coast campaigning, right? And that's this year. But,
yeah.
they want respectable candidates. I'm a lightning rod for everybody's rancor, perhaps,
Well,
And I mean,
I
when I campaigned for the PPC in London, Ontario, I got fucking 50 fingers from passersby in cars maybe every 5, 6 hours. I'd get 10 an hour, right? And
yeah,
people do crazy shit when they think you can't confront them. In person, nobody ever said anything negative at all. Like everybody was
right,
really nice. At the door, at places, people are nice, but in their cars, they'll give you the finger, or if you hold up a sign, they'll try and punch.
yeah,
People's behavior is really weird if they think there's kind of a veil of invisibility around them, like they're
right,
traveling in their cars, so I'll never really be able to see who they were, right? Type of thing.
right.
And anyway,
Well, it's the false sense of security. But like I said, I've read a lot of the stuff that you've wrote, and I've listened to you speak a multitude of times, and I think that unfortunately, the Prince of Pot moniker tends to overshadow Mark
yeah,
the
but I do,
brilliant mind
but I do like that
sometimes.
moniker. At least I earned that,
Well, now
right?
that you're getting older, is it fair to call you the king of cannabis now? Can we?
Well, no, I used to say when people say, "When do you become the king?" Because all princes either become king or the. And I said, when it's legal throughout the whole world, that would be fine, because then
Right.
I would think that the mission is complete. But it's not legal. There are still places that will execute you for cannabis, so that's the case. But I like Prince because Prince is eternally youthful sounding. Whereas,
It's true. Yeah.
whereas you never hear the prince is dead. It's always the king is dead, right?
Yeah. The prince is just chilling.
Yeah, that's right. The princess son. So that's maybe we shouldn't look too much into that.
Yeah, well, Mark, I actually wanted to talk to you about the history of cannabis because
Oh,
there are so many applications for it in ancient history in ways that it was used that I don't think people are aware. So I want to have you back, and I would
by
love
the
to
way,
do a deep
there's
dive
a
into that with you.
terrific book by a great friend of mine. We serialized it in cannabis culture over 20 years. It's called The Illustrated History of Cannabis in Canada. It's a fabulous 125-page book, all illustrated. It's magnificent. It first showed up in cannabis culture, and Canada has a very glorious cannabis history going back hundreds of years. So that would be a great place to talk.
Yeah, yeah, and I would love to talk about the ancient uses of cannabis. Going
Yeah.
back to
Well, that
you
was
know,
more by necessity too, because there was only three fibers in the biblical period, right? Sisal, kenaf, and cotton wasn't really commonly available then. Hemp would have been it. But they're all a bitch because looms were very primitive by then. Clothing, most people only had one or two items of clothing. It's all you could afford. It costs a lot to make, a bit of clothing in the ancient period, right? That's a
right?
terrible period. Monty
Yeah.
Python captures it perfectly in The Holy Grail and Life of Brian. Those weren't great times to be alive.
No, definitely not.
Thank God for the Romans.
That's
One of the all-time greatest reactionary political bits ever was what have the Romans ever done for us? Right? Because it
right.
captures the voters in a lot of ways, exactly like that. And of course, the upshot of the joke is they've done everything you could possibly ask for, right?
Yeah.
Except that one thing. Right. Out with the Romans, right? So,
Well,
brilliant team.
listen, Mark, I'm so glad that you enjoyed this conversation because I was looking forward to this conversation for so long. And um, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Well, I'm on social media causing trouble on X principally. That's my favorite thing. So just look for Mark Scott Emery. In fact, at Mark Scott Emery is my X handle. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm not doing anything anymore. There's nothing really to pay attention. I'm just chilling, smoking a lot of weed, raising kids, and having a lovely life with Lara and working at a grocery store on the graveyard shift.
Hey, man, that is a fucking perfect way. That is a
There you
perfect
go.
way to live, man. It's a way to be. Listen, Mark, hang around for a second, and we'll arrange something offline. I want to have that history of cannabis conversation with you. Maybe next time I'll light one up
Yeah,
too, and
sure.
we'll just go deep.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's some great stuff. Canada has all sorts of cool things that.
But for now, brother, thank you so much, man. This was such
Yeah.
an honor to talk to you. I've known about you since I was a young guy, so
Hey,
this
I
is
feel honored to be following Brett Weinstein.
you know what, everybody says that, so
Yeah, there
it's
you
cool.
go.
Yeah, no, it's
Oh,
great.
really? I'm on the same podcast that he's been on. That's cool.
Well, Mark, again, thank you so much for your time and your
Yeah,
energy,
Jason. Yeah.
and
I
just
look
you
forward to
being
doing it
you, man.
again. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, me too, man. Thank you so much.